I knew something was off when the CFO hugged me. The man hadn't so much as nodded at me in the break room for 5 years, and now he was gripping my shoulders like I'd just pulled him out of a burning building. "Kayla," he said with a smile that never reached his eyes, "you deserve this." Then he handed me a plaque that read, "17 years of operational excellence," like I was being buried alive in a velvet coffin. All around me, champagne flutes clinked and artificial laughter filled the rooftop. Everyone was pretending to be thrilled about the merger, but the interns looked like they were watching a hostage video, and the VP of product was 3 glasses into forgetting her own name. They had a string quartet playing in the corner like this was some damn royal wedding, but the music couldn't cover the tension, vibrating under every forced compliment. And then came the manila envelope. HR handed it to me like it was a slice of cake. "Just a standard contract update," she chirped, part of the integration process. Her voice had that corporate sing-song, high-pitched, empty, weaponized. Nothing major, just a few compliance tweaks. That's when James, my department head, walked by. He didn't look at me, just casually brushed a folded note into my hand like we were spies in a Cold War thriller. 5 words, scribbled in blue ink, "Don't initial page 7. Now, James isn't exactly subtle. He once tried to hide a post-lunch nap by putting a stapler in his hand and calling it deep workflow mode. So for him to pull a move this smooth, my stomach did a full gymnast routine, but I played along, smiled, nodded, laughed at some joke about quarterly synergies. I tucked the contract under my arm, careful not to crease it, and thanked HR for keeping everything on track. All performance. My face did the acting while my brain spun into overdrive. Let me pause real quick to say, if you're into stories where the office champagne turns sour and contracts hide knives between the lines, go ahead and tap that like button and subscribe. 90% of folks forget, but it really helps the team behind these stories keep cooking up more chaos like this. Back to the rooftop. I slipped away under the guise of a bathroom break, took the stairs down 3 flights because elevators have eyes and ears in places like this, and ducked into an empty utility hallway near facilities. No cameras, just flickering lights and that faint scent of industrial lemon cleaner and broken promises. I opened the contract like it might bite me. First 6 pages, all boilerplate nonsense. Stuff about transitional cohesion and workflow harmonization, which basically meant they were inventing new ways to say we're about to gut your department. And then, page 7, clause 11.4F. The heading was harmless enough, continuity of role and duties during transitional phase. Sounded like HR Mad Libs, but I kept reading, and reading. Buried in the 3rd paragraph beneath 2 layers of double negatives and a sentence that ran for almost an entire page was a transfer clause. Authorized temporary realignment of duties and departmental oversight under external compliance vendor management in Phoenix. Phoenix. As in Arizona. As in 2,000 miles from my home, my kids' school, my mother's dialysis clinic, and everything else I care about. The kicker? It maintained my title, but explicitly voided any protections tied to tenure, equity, or internal promotion tracks. I'd be listed as operations lead on the org chart, sure, but in reality, I'd be a glorified admin under a third-party contractor, earning 60 cents on the dollar and stripped of every career safety net I'd earned since the Bush administration. And they thought I'd sign this. Right here, on the rooftop, with a smile, while holding a goddamn plaque. I stared at that clause like it was a landmine. Then I pulled out my phone and photographed it, page, timestamp, metadata, everything. Because if they were going to play legal blackjack with my life, I was going to count every card. 6:14 p.m. The moment I stopped being a good employee and started being a problem. I stood there in that hallway, listening to the muffled string quartet warble its way through some Baroque nightmare upstairs, and I realized they thought they'd already buried me. They forgot I knew how to dig. The stairwell was cold, even in heels and rage. Concrete walls. Harsh lighting. That slight echo that makes every breath sound like you're trying not to cry. I sat down on the steps, halfway between the rooftop lies and the boiler room truth, and opened the contract again, flipping straight to page 7 like it was a loaded gun. Clause 11.4F stared back at me. First pass, it read like corporate oatmeal. Continuity of title and function maintained under transitional oversight protocols. Yeah, okay. Sounded like HR sneezed into a thesaurus. But the second read? That's when it turned into something else entirely. Employee role may be reassigned to an approved third-party compliance vendor for the duration of the merger integration process. All title continuity will be preserved for branding and workflow visibility, though this reassignment shall not constitute continued employment under legacy benefit structures, including but not limited to equity, IP authorship rights, and historical compensation calculations. In plain English, they were outsourcing my existence. I'd keep my title. I'd keep my photo on the website. Hell, I'd probably keep the same email signature. But behind the curtain, I'd be gutted. Equity? Gone. Retirement match? Gone. 17 years of performance-based bump tiers and accumulated PTO, converted into vendor-aligned compensation protocols, which is legal speak for, we'll pay you what we feel like and you'll thank us for it. And worst of all, I wouldn't even be listed as terminated. I'd just fade into the back end like a bad line of code in a dying app. I sat there, clutching the paper, hands shaking just enough to make the ink blur. For a second, I actually thought I might throw up. I'd been loyal through 3 CEOs, 2 office relocations, a data breach that nearly killed us, and an asbestos scandal I single-handedly swept under the rug. This was my thank you, corporate hospice care with a bow on it. I pressed my thumb and forefinger to my temples. Breathe, don't explode, not yet. You only get to nuke a bridge once, make it count. I looked back down at the clause. They'd even bolded the phrase no loss of title like that was supposed to be comforting. Like I should feel flattered to keep a name badge while they set fire to everything it stood for. That's when the numbness broke. The fury didn't come like a flash fire. It crept in like cold water rising around your ankles. Quiet, steady, merciless. A new kind of clarity. The kind that doesn't scream, it watches, it waits, it plans. I opened the camera app. Snap. Then again zoomed in on the clause. Snap. Then the timestamp, 6:14 p.m. Snap. Then I scrolled back and pulled up the original contract I'd signed 6 years ago, still saved in my personal drive. Searched for the phrase employee consent required for reassignment of function. There it was, plain as day and conspicuously missing from the new version. That's when it clicked. This wasn't sloppiness. This wasn't an HR oversight or a bad copy-paste job. This was a scalpel, precision sabotage. They'd counted on the party, on the wine, on the string quartet, on the performative speeches and paperweight plaques and executive smiles. They'd created a distraction opera, banking on the fact that I'd be too stunned or flattered or tired to read what they were really handing me. And most of the others probably had. I imagined them upstairs right now, laughing over tiny cheesecakes and signing away their careers under soft lighting and hollow praise. They'd wake up next week and find out they didn't work for Carrick Industries anymore. They worked for a shell company run out of a strip mall in Temp. But not me, because someone, James, note passer with the guilt complex, still had a shred of decency, or maybe just a fear of legal blowback. Either way, he tipped me off. And now the only question was what to do with the truth. I wasn't going to confront HR. That'd just trigger a containment protocol. They'd slap on some apologetic smile, offer me a meeting on Monday, and start working to bury it before sunrise. No, I needed to move outside the chain of command. First, backed up the images to a secure cloud folder. Then I added them to a private email draft addressed to someone I hadn't spoken to in almost a year, Rebecca Tran, former in-house legal counsel, now an ethics consultant who owed me a favor. Then I started writing. Subject line, need eyes on a clause fast. Attached, 3 photos, a screenshot comparison, and a short message. They're gutting roles under vendor language. It's buried deep. Equity, IP, all stripped. No disclosure form attached. I haven't signed. What are my options if this was distributed without board review? Sent. My phone buzzed before I even stood up. James again, you read it? I typed. How long have you known? His reply came 10 seconds later, weeks. Legal said it wouldn't hold, but they distributed anyway. I stared at that text until the screen dimmed. Weeks. He'd known for weeks. They all had. They just assumed I'd go along, smile pretty. And accept the erasure. They forgot what I do for a living. I don't sign off on things I haven't verified. I don't trust glossy words or champagne toasts. I verify systems. I trace rot. I follow the clause until the trapdoor creaks open. And right now, someone upstairs was standing on that trapdoor. I stood there in the dim stairwell, long after the rage settled into something colder, something quieter. A quiet that knows exactly how deep the knife went. My phone still lit from James's reply, weeks. Legal said it wouldn't hold, but they went forward anyway. They already filed it. That's what that meant. Not just a rough draft, not a proposal. This clause wasn't in theory, it was in motion. The moment HR handed me that contract, it became a procedural formality. They weren't asking me to accept the new terms, they were daring me to notice them. Because once I initialed page 7, my leverage would be gone. No clawback, no challenge. Just a box checked in a dusty folder somewhere in legal and me waking up next week with a new badge that didn't even scan at the corporate entrance. That's why the timing was so damn convenient. Champagne, plaques, rooftop toasts, it was all pressure, emotional, social, optical. Pressure to sign fast, smile wide, and not ask too many questions. And most people would have done it. Hell, I might have too. If James hadn't slipped me that note, I'd be upstairs right now, swirling Pinot and giggling at Janet from Finance's 7th merger virgin joke, while my livelihood got laundered into a vendor spreadsheet. But instead, I was sitting on a cold step with a copy of my original contract open in one tab, and this corporate hit job of a revision in the other. One key phrase had vanished. Any modification to employment status requires written employee consent. They took it out. They didn't amend it, didn't reword it, they flat out removed it like it never mattered. Like I never mattered. Betrayal wasn't even the right word. Betrayal implies emotion. This wasn't emotional, it was structural, planned, polished. Executed with the kind of sterile precision usually reserved for autopsies and tax fraud. I exhaled slow. My chest didn't ache anymore, it was rigid, focused. I copied the contract text, highlighted the missing phrase, screenshot it side by side with the clause on page 7. Then I opened a new email and typed in a name I hadn't needed in a long time, Rebecca Tran. We'd worked side by side for 5 years, back when she was the company's in-house counsel, and I was just a rising manager still pretending not to know how the sausage got made. She left after the new CFO came in, said she didn't trust where the board was heading. I didn't either. but I stayed, because someone had to clean up the messes when the C-suite boys started playing Calvin ball with contracts. I typed, "Hey Rebecca, urgent." They stripped my role into a third-party vendor clause without triggering termination. I haven't signed. Clause appears invalid without employee consent language. Original contract attached, so is the revised clause. Can you confirm if this constitutes bad faith restructuring? I hesitated, then added, if I'm not protected under continuity, what can I trigger instead? Attach the screenshots. Subject line, clause 11.4, F urgent eyes needed. Hit send. I uploaded the photos to a secure folder on my personal drive, mirrored it twice. One backup on my old Dropbox, the other to a private cloud I hadn't touched since the last time legal tried to quietly sunset a data privacy initiative without telling ops. It was 6:22 p.m. I checked the contract again. The filing clause referenced midnight as the automatic enrollment cutoff. If no countersignature or objection was submitted by then, the clause took effect via passive assent. So this was a countdown. They were betting on exhaustion. That I'd smile, take my plaque, have a drink or two, go home, fall asleep watching reruns, and wake up unknowingly reclassified as a leased asset. Except I don't go home early during integration week. I don't fall asleep during compliance reviews. I don't passively assent to being erased. I texted James again. Why didn't you say something sooner? He took his time this time. The typing dots appeared, vanished, reappeared. Then finally, I tried. They told us to keep it quiet. Said anyone who flagged it would be labeled resistant to integration. Of course, that old trick. Turn caution into non-compliance. Make skepticism look like sabotage. Classic CFO tactics, isolate the person who sees the trap and hope no one else hears the alarm. But I wasn't isolated anymore, because I knew exactly who else had eyes on the clause now. 3 minutes later, Rebecca replied, one line, that clause is illegal without accompanying disclosure. Don't sign, let me make a call. I sat back, letting her words settle like armor on my spine. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to confront. I just had to wait and watch. The next move wouldn't be mine. Theirs would be the mistake. Mine would be the correction. The party was still in full swing when I came back up to the rooftop, like the stairwell hadn't just hosted my career's funeral dress rehearsal. Lights were warmer now, sky turning that expensive shade of twilight. Everyone looked a little looser, drunker, smugger. You could practically smell the self-congratulation in the air. Marketing was already taking selfies with the CEO like the merger was a Super Bowl win. Nobody noticed I'd vanished. Nobody ever really does, until you give them a reason to. I floated in like nothing happened, holding my contract packet in one hand and a half-finished rosé someone left abandoned on a cocktail table in the other. No one questions you if you act like you belong, and I had 17 years of pretending to belong to fall back on. I spotted Aaron Green, the board liaison and certified guy who always wears a lanyard even when he doesn't need to, standing near the edge, chatting up some junior exec like he invented pivot tables. Aaron wasn't powerful, but he was adjacent to power. He was the go-between, and I knew exactly how to twist his instincts like a wet towel. Evening, Aaron, I said, raising my glass slightly. Hell of a turnout. He turned and gave me that confused, trying to place you look. Kayla, yes, great, right? Really great, I sipped. Quick question for you, compliance curiosity. Sure, he said, eager to sound important. Let's say, purely hypothetically, a contract contained a clause allowing for third-party role reassignment while maintaining title continuity. But I smiled casually. The clause excluded continuity of equity and removed prior tenure protections. What would the board's position be on that? He blinked. I'd have to see the language. Is this in the revisions? Again, hypothetical, I said, but interesting, right? Especially if there's no employee disclosure on file. He choked a little on his wine. That would be problematic, would it? I tilted my head, even if it was already distributed for signature. He stared at me, not blinking, not breathing. And that's when I knew the liaison hadn't been briefed, which meant the full board hadn't been briefed either. Clause wasn't just shady, it was concealed. Excuse me a moment, he said, already reaching for his phone. I walked away before he could ask follow-ups. I'd done my part. I'd ceded the worry. Now it was time to cut the leash. Back near the bar, I pulled out my phone and opened the photos again. Clause 11.4, F, my original contract, the missing employee consent language highlighted like a sniper scope. I composed a short email to external legal counsel, board chair subject, urgent, contract language review attached the clause photo and a side-by-side with the original phrasing. Then I wrote, discovered a clause in page 7 of the revised employee agreement distributed tonight. Language allows third-party reassignment without legacy benefit protections. No associated disclosure included. As an original contract signatory, I have not authorized changes to status or equity. Concerned this was not board-reviewed prior to distribution. Timestamped evidence attached. I hovered my finger over the send button for a second, then tapped. Felt nothing. No nerves, no thrill, just quiet calculation. Then I tucked my phone into my blazer pocket and made a slow lap around the perimeter of the event. Let the sounds of clinking glasses and fake laughter drift past me like wind through a bad dream. If anyone greeted me, I nodded back. Polite and unreadable. Let them think I was just another tired middle manager riding the wave. 3 minutes later, I felt my phone buzz. One new text. It was from the chair. Received. Thank you, stand by. That was all. But the ripples started almost immediately. The chair stepped out from the group he was talking to, glanced at his phone again, and didn't even excuse himself before leaving. Just turned, fast walking toward the service elevator like a man who forgot he left the stove on, with a $180 million deal on it. Aaron, meanwhile, was white as chalk. I watched him from across the room, nervously pacing, earbuds in, nodding at no one. HR had stopped smiling. One of the executive assistants was whispering into her phone while clutching her tablet like a life preserver. And then the DJ, midway through a peppy remix of Uptown Funk, abruptly stopped the music, just like that, cut to silence. Everyone looked up. The house lights came up a second later, brighter, colder, sterile. Phones started buzzing, one here, two there, then a chorus like cicadas waking up in the heat. Executives reading notifications. Assistant VPs looking confused. One intern actually dropped her cocktail. And through it all, I stood by the bar, still sipping someone else's wine, invisible and in control. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The clause had spoken. Somewhere above my head, chaos had found a seat at the table. I didn't need a calendar invite to know the board was meeting, unscheduled, unprepared, and unhinged. They'd scurried into that glass-paneled war room on the 28th floor like rats to a smoke vent, hoping the stench of their own paperwork wouldn't follow them in. But paper burns slow. Especially the kind that's time-stamped, witnessed, and currently sitting in the inbox of the board chair, the external legal team, and a woman whose middle name is Retention Clause. I was 2 floors down, tucked into the empty wellness room, because of course our building had a wellness room now, complete with a non-functioning essential oil diffuser and a sign that said "You got this," in Comic Sans. I sat cross-legged on the floor beside a mini-fridge full of La Croix no one drank, listening to the distant hum of elevator doors and the occasional high heel click from someone trying not to run. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew the choreography. First, the CFO would pretend confusion. He'd squint at printed copy of the clause like it had spontaneously rewritten itself. Then he'd say something like, "This was a late-stage insertion suggested by legal," followed by a low-grade shrug meant to defer blame without admitting awareness. But legal doesn't play possum. Someone there would push back, someone always does. My phone buzzed once then again, messages from my contact inside the room. One of the few who still had a spine. They didn't run it by the full board. Chair is furious. Legal too. CFO is red. They're panicking. I let that word roll around in my head like a hard candy. Panicking. Funny how quiet panic is when you're not the one holding the match. Panic isn't shouting. It's the silence when no one knows who to scapegoat fast enough. It's the chair's half glance when a lawyer clears their throat too long. It's Aaron Green's phone battery dying before he can text someone to cover his ass. And me? I sat in my wellness room throne and watched the dominoes tip. I pulled up the HR email again, subject line, "Final employee agreement for signature urgent," dated 4:12 p.m., sent to me and 200 others, mass distributed under the guise of routine, tucked into a PDF sealed like a handshake from a man you shouldn't trust near your drink. I hovered my thumb over the file, then deleted it, not archived, not flagged for follow-up, deleted because I didn't need their version anymore. The record didn't belong to them, it belonged to me. My copies were backed up, encrypted, mirrored in 3 drives and 2 cloud vaults. HR could try to roll it back, redact it, gaslight the timestamps into oblivion. Too late. The moment I clicked that shutter in the stairwell, the real version entered circulation. Another buzz. Chair asked external counsel if this could trigger material misrepresentation. That made me stop. I stared at the message like it might detonate. Material misrepresentation. See, it's one thing to bury a bad clause in an employee contract. You can always pretend it was a mistake, a footnote, something lost in formatting. But when that clause contradicts core representations in a merger filing, when it violates statements made to investors about continuity, internal staffing, retention commitments, then you're not just dirty, you're disqualified. Merger law is brutal that way. If your filings are shown to be knowingly inaccurate, especially regarding key personnel continuity, it can tank the deal. Trigger clawbacks. Open the gates for litigation. That clause didn't just put my job at risk. It put the entire merger at risk, which meant I wasn't the story anymore. I was the fuse. I leaned back against the beanbag chair they probably bought from a startup with too much series of funding and let myself smile. Just a little. One of those quiet, lip-curled half smiles you save for the kind of victory no one will clap for. The kind that lives in the silence after you've turned the volume off on someone else's disaster. For 17 years, I was a name on a float chart. A cog, a steady hand, the person you call when the data migration goes sideways at 3 a.m., the one who gets missed in town halls and thanked in footnotes. And now I was the reason the DJ packed up early. The reason the chair left mid-toast. The reason the entire board was locked upstairs with a whiteboard and a stack of red pens wondering how one clause could undo 9 months of handshakes and press leaks. Never thought I'd matter. But when you're trying to quietly erase someone, make sure they don't know the building's blueprints better than you. Make sure they haven't memorized the emergency exits. Make damn sure they haven't saved every copy, every version, every edit. because once the alarms start, you can't put the fire back in the wall. And baby, I was the fire alarm. From the 26th floor wellness room, I couldn't see the boardroom 2 floors above, but I didn't need to. I could feel it, the heat of reputation smoldering through the concrete, the muffled scrape of chairs pulled sharply back when someone realized their name was on a clause they didn't authorize. The CFO's name, I imagined, was getting a lot of airplay. I had nothing more to send, no dramatic speech, no trembling confrontation. My part was done. Now the evidence worked while I watched. It was almost clinical, watching a system correct itself when you've slipped just the right variable into the bloodstream. My phone buzzed again. This time it was from the inside. Rebecca, their legal just called me. You were right. That clause requires your signature to be enforceable, and without it, it's void. Worse, distributing it without consent is grounds for breach. I stared at her message for a long time, letting the words soak in, not with relief but confirmation. It was never about whether the clause was unethical. It was about whether it was sloppy enough to be their undoing. It was. The digital photos I'd sent earlier, Rebecca had already passed them along. And with them, the kicker, metadata. Embedded timestamps, original file creation dates, and the nail in the coffin, evidence that the clause had been copied and inserted from an older, rejected vendor agreement. That rejection was logged. That language had been deliberately reused. Couldn't claim mistake. Not anymore. Another message followed, this one from my internal contact. Legal confirms, clause was inserted by CFO's chief of staff. No board review. They used boilerplate from a third-party vendor contract. Someone traced the edit history. It was snuck in Tuesday night. Snuck, that's the word, like it was a prank. Like gutting 17 years of my labor was a late-night typo. Except it wasn't a typo, it was intent. Scrubbed of fingerprints but sloppily filed anyway. Rebecca's next message hit harder. They never filed the required disclosure with HR. Distribution tonight technically violates pre-merger employee continuity attestations. I didn't even flinch, because that word again, continuity. That's what the investors cared about. That's what the merger paperwork swore up and down would be protected. Key personnel would remain. No material disruptions, no reassignments without consent. And now the board knew that not only had someone tried to disrupt a key role, they'd done it in secret, bypassing the very protections meant to keep the deal compliant. At 7:11 p.m., my phone buzzed one more time, this one short. The chair, thank you, stand by, I read it, deleted it, didn't even smile, because by now I didn't need to grin. This wasn't a victory lap, this was procedure. This was what happens when someone pulls the wrong wire and expects the lights to stay on. According to my contact, the conversation upstairs was unraveling fast. Legal had walked them through it like a surgeon delivering a terminal diagnosis. The clause requires explicit, signed employee consent. No such consent was filed. The contract was distributed anyway. The photo metadata proves the clause was not just inserted, but concealed. Its language mirrors a rejected vendor template, not internal HR-approved language. Therefore, it constitutes an unapproved material deviation. And because of that deviation, every employee agreement distributed that evening was now, legally speaking, trash. That was when one board member said it aloud. I heard it from my contact before the echoes faded. This invalidates every employee agreement distributed tonight. Just like that. 17 years of trying to matter quietly, and now I was the sentence that undid 100. Somewhere above me, the CFO was trying to find a desk to hide under. Maybe he was yelling. Maybe he was blaming his assistant. Maybe he was trying to point at me from across the boardroom like I was some rogue saboteur who had it out for him. But it wouldn't matter, because this wasn't emotion. This wasn't personal. This was clause logic, procedural revenge, where the correction doesn't scream, it files. I leaned my head back against the wall and closed my eyes. For the first time all day, I felt steady, like every part of me was in sync. Heart, breath, strategy, no noise in my chest, no thoughts screaming to run. I didn't need to fight, they were doing it to themselves. All I had to do was let the clause finish what it started. The meeting stretched into its second hour, and though I couldn't hear the boardroom walls cracking, I could feel them flexing. My contact upstairs sent one final ping, contract processing frozen. Board launched internal review, everyone scrambling, everyone but me. I'd moved from the wellness room to an empty records closet just off the elevator, quieter, darker, and poetic in a way no one else would notice. 17 years of keeping systems airtight, workflows smooth, and teams intact, and now I was watching the structure creak under its own corruption, alone, calm, surrounded by cardboard archives and a forgotten box of printer toner. I pulled up one last file. It was buried in my personal archive folder, dated and double encrypted. My original contract from back when the company still went by a different name, before it had been acquired and renamed and rebranded into whatever buzzword soup it was now. But one thing hadn't changed my status. Clause 3.1, the employee shall not be reassigned, downgraded, or otherwise materially displaced from their current role without prior written consent. In the absence of such consent, the employer shall offer full severance under the standard termination policy. It had been a fight to get that clause included back then. HR hated it. Legal dragged their feet. But I was 2 years into a nonstop operations crisis marathon at the time, and they needed me more than I needed them, so it stayed. Written, signed, archived, and now was a grenade with the pin already pulled. Because all week they'd been using language like reclassification, temporary reassignment, and compliance integration. Dressing it up, painting over rot, but the truth, they weren't just shifting my role, they were hollowing it out, replacing the engine with a sticker and hoping no one opened the hood. Too bad for them, I wrote the owner's manual. I attached the original signed contract, circled clause 3.1 in bright red, and typed one line to the board's external counsel and the chair. For your records, this clause remains active. Proposed changes violate severance protection terms. Sent. No rage, no threats, just facts. Their problem now. 5 minutes later, the first reply hit my inbox. External counsel confirmed. Clause 3.1 supersedes attempted reclassification. Penalties apply if breach is pursued without resolution. And then the second. Board chair, thank you for the clarity. We'll be addressing this directly. Upstairs, the temperature dropped about 10 degrees. Word was the CFO tried to deflect blame, claimed legal had advised the clause was non-binding. Classic maneuver. Toss someone under the nearest luxury office chair and hope the fall's cushioned by vagueness. But legal wasn't playing human shield anymore. They pushed back. Hard. My contact told me the exchange was brutal. One of the senior counsels actually stood, pointed at a printed copy of the clause and said, "This was not reviewed. We flagged this language as risky 2 quarters ago. Your team reinserted it." A pause. Then someone, probably the chair, asked the obvious. "Did you knowingly distribute employee agreements that violated existing contracts without flagging to the board?" And that was the beginning of the end. Because now it wasn't just about gutting one employee's role. It was about knowingly creating legal exposure during a merger. It was about exposing the entire board to shareholder action. About giving the acquiring firm a clean reason to walk. And me? I didn't have to say a word. I didn't even have to send another email. Because the clause I had fought to keep all those years ago had become a shield I didn't need to lift, just reveal. I wasn't just protected, I was untouchable. It tried to make me vanish under third-party reassignment and legal fog. But my contract didn't care about spin. It cared about terms, and they had violated those terms so blatantly, so carelessly, that now the whole structure was bending to avoid snapping. No one talked about Kayla Monroe in the press releases. I wasn't quoted in the merger coverage. I didn't get the LinkedIn shout-outs or the glossy headshots in the pitch decks. But right now, every executive in that room was talking about me. And I didn't have to gloat. I just had to outlast the lie. And I had. The next morning, the office smelled like toner, burnt ego, and silence. No all-hands meeting, no press release. No cheery emails from the CEO about exciting next chapters. Just the sterile hum of damage control being printed, stapled, and walked door to door by HR like it was a chain letter nobody wanted to touch. At 9:03 a.m., I got the first forward. Subject, update, employee agreements temporary hold. Sent to all staff, dry as drywall. Please note that the employee contract revisions distributed on October 15 are currently under legal review. We advise all recipients to refrain from signing until further notice. Revisions under review, no apology, no explanation. Just those 3 antiseptic words, revisions under review. I leaned back in my chair, my actual chair, the one in my actual office, not in Phoenix or Vendorland or wherever the hell they thought they could bury me, and clicked open a second file that had been forwarded quietly, anonymously. This one wasn't public. It was a draft LinkedIn post. After 17 incredible years, we bid farewell to Kayla Monroe, whose leadership and dedication guided our operations through countless transitions. Please join us in wishing her the best on her next adventure. The comments section was blank. The draft date? Yesterday morning, before the party, before the clause, before they thought I might be a variable worth worrying about. They'd already written my eulogy. But instead of posting it, they were now rewriting the org chart. Because shortly after the retraction memo went out, word trickled down that the board had requested the CFO step back during the review period. Not fired yet. That's not how these things work. You step back so the firm can evaluate impact. You do it quietly, strategically, and with just enough distance that nobody asks for your ID at the next board meeting, because you're not invited to it. And then came the ask. Midday, my phone buzzed. Not from legal, not from James. From the chair. "Can you meet this afternoon? We'd like you to stay on temporarily. We're forming a transition oversight group for post-merger compliance continuity. Would like your perspective on internal protections." Translation: the house is on fire, and they finally noticed I used to keep the matches out of reach. I didn't answer immediately. I closed my laptop, got up, walked the long corridor past the glass conference rooms where I'd once sat on the periphery of decisions I silently executed after others collected the credit. I passed the executive kitchen with the fancy espresso machine I wasn't approved to use. Past the glass case that held the corporate timeline like it was scripture. Pictures of old logos, founders in suits, headlines from trade publications no one reads unless they're being laid off. I ended up at the window overlooking the delivery dock. The exact spot where I'd first parked my car 17 years ago after HR called and said, "You're hired. Can you start Monday?" I'd eaten a granola bar for dinner and sat in that car too long before going in, thinking maybe this job would finally stick. And it had. It stuck hard enough to leave bruises. Now they wanted me back. I walked back to my office, opened my phone, and typed my reply, "I'll advise. Temporarily. My condition, I report directly to the chair, not legal, not the CFO's interim replacement, not HR. The chair." 10 minutes passed. Then, agreed. "We'll formalize this by end of day." I put my phone down, folded my hands, and stared at the space on my desk where my plaque had been before the party, before the ceremony, the champagne, the knife in a manila envelope. Restoration doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it's just quiet ground returned after the fog clears. They wanted a farewell. Instead, they're getting footnotes corrected and signatures re-examined under my supervision. And I'm not interested in apologies. Just terms, this time mine. The boardroom was colder than I remembered, not in temperature, just in tone. The kind of cold that sets in after a storm when everyone's pretending they didn't almost drown. Mahogany table polished too perfectly. Bottled water labels turned outward. A tray of untouched croissants sweating under a cling-wrap veil, like even the snacks knew better than to interrupt. I walked in wearing the same gray blazer I'd worn the night of the merger party. Same shoes, same quiet, but everything else was different. This time, I wasn't offered a seat at the end. I was given one at the center. The chair nodded at me as I entered, not smiling, just affirming. Like we both knew how many miles had been walked, and neither of us felt like clapping about it. I took my place beside the new compliance auditor, no-nonsense woman named Phyllis with half-moon glasses and a memory like a black box. We'd spoken twice since the reversal. Both times, she asked precise questions. Both times, she already knew the answers. I liked her. Around the table, the usual suspects wore various shades of forced neutrality. Legal looked exhausted. HR looked smaller. One of the junior VPs kept clicking the back of his pen like he wanted someone else to yell first. And then there was the CFO. Still here, technically, for now, sitting 3 chairs down with a notepad he hadn't written on and a laptop he hadn't opened. He looked like someone waiting to be called into a sentencing hearing, aware of the outcome, still clinging to hope it might be a misunderstanding. It wasn't. The chair called the meeting to order with a single sheet of paper in hand. "We have one motion on the table," he said. "Appointment of Interim Transition Oversight Officer, Hilla Monroe, for the duration of the compliance remediation and contract restructuring process." No one objected. No one even cleared their throat. The motion passed. Phyllis gave me a brief nod. One of those barely there gestures that says, "Don't make a mess unless you mean to clean it too." I nodded back. And then I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim navy blue folder. No logos, no theatrics. Just clean cardstock and a single sheet inside. I slid it across the table, slow and deliberate, until it rested in front of the CFO like a placemat for regret. He didn't touch it. "This," I said, voice low but razor sharp, "was the clause you wanted me to sign." His eyes dropped to the folder like it might bite him. I flipped it open for him, revealing the page. Clause 11.4F, right where he'd buried it, now annotated with red ink, corrections, and a single stapled addendum. Consent refused employee protected under original contract terms, Clause 3.1. I made a few edits, I said, then leaned back. "Shall we go through them?" He didn't answer, didn't blink, just stared, like a man watching the moment he thought was private get replayed on a security camera in front of a jury. Silence filled the room, not awkward, not strained, just final. No one moved, no one objected, because there was nothing left to object to. I wasn't loud, I wasn't smug. I didn't gloat or smirk or drop some gotcha line for the record. That's not how restoration works. That's not how leverage feels when it's real. It just is. The CFO slowly reached for his bag, zipped it closed, didn't look at anyone as he stood. And I sat still, watching, not as his replacement or his rival, but as his consequence. This wasn't revenge, this was correction. And I never had to raise my voice to get it. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.